So, are you ready for some stories? Excellent. Okay. Then our first story of the night comes from Chris Cameron.
Hi. All right. Put yourself into Bullhead City, Arizona. I know. January 1st, 2016, 6 a.m. Happy New Year? Not exactly. Got up to find that half the house was flooded in ankle-deep water from a broken pipe in the water heater closet. It was a mess. It was a holiday weekend. It was really a mess. Anyway, after much wrangling and hangling, about a week later, I finally got contractors to come in to tear everything apart, got my elder mom moved with our 3 dogs up to a rental property 25 miles away, and got the project started. Everything was kind of going along all right. I was going down there every day to check on things. On February 6th, a Wednesday night, I'm on my way to my bowling league, which I did every Wednesday, and my contractor says, oh, by the way, I need 1 more box of porcelain tile to finish the bathtub. Can you pick it up on the way to Laughlin? I said, sure. So I go to the home decor store, go down to the aisle where the porcelain tile is. These boxes were about 2 feet long by 1 foot wide, and the bottom of them was about 6 inches deep. So I see them on the shelf, but rather than laying them down flat on a shelf about this high, they had stacked them on the short end, back to back to back. There were about 7 of them stacked like this. As I try to dislodge the first one, I can't get it off the shelf to, muscle it into my cart because there was 1 box laying down next to them. So as I turn to the right to move that box, I didn't know it was anchoring all the other boxes. The front 60-pound box of tile flips off the shelf and crushes my left foot. I fall to the ground, pull off my Ugg boot. I can already see a very angry red mark on my foot, and it starts to swell immediately, and I'm yelling, somebody call the manager, I've been injured, please, somebody call for help. I saw 2 or 3 people with their carts coming down the aisle and looking at me, and I'm yelling, please go get help, and they shrug and on they go. I'm like, what the heck, So about 5 minutes later, finally, this young, fresh-faced assistant manager with a clipboard comes up to me and says, I need to take an accident report. I said, you need to call 911. I got to get to the hospital. So while we're waiting for the EMTs to come, he takes his report. The EMTs take me to the ER, and the doctor takes an x-ray and comes in and says, I have some good news and I have some bad news. The good news is your foot isn't broken. The bad news is it's badly crushed, and you'll probably not be able to put any weight on it for at least 4 to 6 weeks. So here's a pair of crutches and some ibuprofen. If it's not better in a week, go see a doctor. I'm telling you, that pain was unfreaking believable. By the time I got up in the morning, my foot was like a 5-pound sausage, a 10-pound sausage in a 5-pound bag. It was swollen, red, mottled, and it felt like somebody was lit it on fire. So I modeled through a week. Finally, at the end of the week, my mom says, look, I know this really good podiatrist down in Fort Mojave, about 30 miles away. Let's go see him. So I pack her up in the car, get her walker, the whole bit, get down to the doctor. He takes another x-ray and comes back and says, the doctor at the ER was wrong. Your foot is broken. He said, look, that little bone on the top of your foot? Okay. He said, see this little fracture mark? You can see it right next to that bone. So I'm going to put you in a boot cast for about 5 weeks, and we'll see how you do. If I thought the pain was bad before, strapping me into that boot cast was like putting a 5-foot-pound brick on top of my foot, wrapping it up, and lighting it with a torch. I'm telling you, every day I had to rip that Velcro open and pack my foot with ice 6 or 7 times a day just to be able to get through the day. I could barely sleep. I couldn't think straight. At the end of 3 weeks, I call him and say to him, the pain hasn't abated even like a little bit. He says to me, Chris, you broke your foot. There's going to be pain. But I'll tell you what, we'll do a CT scan just to make sure we didn't miss anything. So I hobble into the CT thing with my crutches, the whole bit, go through the whole thing. I've now been in the boot cast for a month by the time I go back to get the results of the CT scan. And he says, I have some good news and some bad news. I said, okay. The good news is your foot really wasn't broken. That was an old sports injury, probably when you used to play racquetball. The bad news is you have this condition called regional sympathetic dystrophy, and it'll never go away. I said, what does that mean exactly? He said, well, it's like it's all in your head, but it's not really in your head, but it's all in your head. Right now, my head felt like it was going to blow right off the top of my neck. I swear to God, I thought brains were going to splatter all over the ceiling. I said, well, how do we fix it? And he said, there is no fixing it. Call your insurance company, get a pain management doctor, and go see them. So the next day, of course, I hobble out on my crutches. Oh, he says, and here's the boot cast for free. I hobble out of my crutches. So I called, the next day, and they said, okay, there's a pain management doctor in your network in Phoenix or one in San Diego. I was a retirement planner at the time. Yeah, 5 hours either way. And because I worked in San Diego part-time with clients, I said, okay, and I had a friend there. I could stay with her. I said, I'll go there. So I go, I get all the stuff, send them to him. A week later, I show up in San Diego, and he says to me, well, I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that RSD is now called CRPS. It's chronic regional pain syndrome. And we can do several different things to try to mitigate the pain. The bad news is you may never walk without assistance again. It's never going to go away. I was speechless. What? So in May of 2016, I went into physical therapy. I drove back and forth to San Diego twice a week. I did laser surgery. They blew me up in a big thing that made me only walk with 1/4 of my weight on a treadmill. I was seeing an acupuncturist. I did water therapy in a pool. I did everything you can think of to do. I was also seeing a psychiatrist because they were trying to hypnotize me and train my brain into not hearing the message from my foot telling me that it was still hurting. So 2 years later, I'm still on crutches, and the doctor says there's only 2 options left. We can either put a spinal implant into your spine with a button in your butt that you push to regulate the pain, or you can do ketamine infusions. I suggest you try the ketamine. I'd never heard of ketamine. I'd never done drugs. I didn't know anything about Special K parties or anything like that. So, I'm like, no, okay, whatever. That guy was in Scottsdale. I was only 4.5 hours away. So I gather up everything, send it to the doctor, go to Scottsdale, and he says, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to do ketamine once a month and see how you respond. But we want you to have a 70% good response or it's never going to work. So for 6 months, I went every month to do ketamine. Ketamine is like dropping LSD, okay? That's bad enough. Not only did I hallucinate for 3 hours every time that they did it, they paralyze you with a sedative called Versed, which is a paralytic anesthesia. So I was like a zombie the whole time. There were times that I would lay there and forget to breathe, and I would hear the nurse saying, Chris, you know how to breathe. Take a breath, take a breath, take a breath. I'd have to remember to breathe. There were times that I couldn't remember if I had a nose on my face. I would try to, put my hand on my face to see, do I really have... Sometimes I didn't know if I had a face. There was one time that I remember laying there, and the guy apparently was a novice, and I remember laying there thinking, oh my God, they've killed me this time. I hope somebody takes care of Mom and the dogs. Let me tell you, it was a trip. After the 7th infusion, the doctor said to me, if the next one doesn't give you 70% relief, it's never going to work. My brain went kaboom. It has to work, it has to work, it has to work. So I went in for the 8th infusion, and thank God I did finally get almost 70% relief. And after 2.5 years, I was able to walk without crutches. Let me tell you, it was a process. That first year, at the end of the year, I realized I would never be able to wear high heels again or any shoe that touches any part of my foot other than my toes. So I had to get rid of all my shoes. The second year, I reluctantly got rid of my 6 pair of cowboy boots and all my golfing equipment, or my bowling equipment, I'm sorry. And I had bowled for 7 years in league and 6 years in state and national tournaments all over Nevada, and I'd won 5 medals in senior Olympic tournaments. So that was a really hard dream to get rid of. But at the end of 9 years, here I stand. I was able to walk in without crutches. I still limp sometimes. And from limping for 2.5 years, it blew out the SI joint in my right hip, so I have to have shots every 6 months for that. It blew out my right knee. And even though 2 doctors told me, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, a 3rd doctor said, oh, I think we can do it. He was wrong. But I was hoping for 1 good leg. Now I've got 2 bum legs because it didn't work, and I have pain from that, so I have to deal with that on a daily basis. And I still have a hoop over the end of my bed because I can't stand the sheet touching my toes, my feet at all, my foot at all. But I didn't get rid of my golf clubs because I hold a hope deep down inside that someday, somehow, I will walk one exotic golf course again, even if I can only do it in 1 shoe.
Thank you, Chris. Well, Chris is a retired retirement planner. I'm confused, but okay. Anyways, she currently is caring for her elderly mom. As she mentioned, she moved here from Bullhead City in Laughlin to Chino Valley in January of last year. And by all mentioned, she is absolutely loving it here. So good for you. Welcome. And when not being hassled and bothered by me to do things, she's writing an inspirational memoir about overcoming child abuse. And that's a different story. So, all right. Story number 2. Ali Cassidy. Come on up, Ali.
So I'll say that I have always really believed in the scientific method. In fact, I'll tell you that even before the age of 5, I was making scientific observations of what was going on around me. I grew up in New York City, and while walking through Central Park at the age of 4, something splatted on my head, and I went up there and looked at it. It's black and white. So my theory is it's skunk poop. Right? It's black and white. There's a skunk up there, he pooped on my head. Great theory. The second observation was I was a real extroverted little kid, and I loved to talk to anybody and everybody. So apparently I walked up to this homeless guy on a bench and sat next to him right away and started chatting him up. And I'm looking at his wrist, and his wrist has a lot of hair on it. And so I'm chatting to him, and I said, you know, your wrist has a lot of little curly hairs on it. Did you know that my mommy has hair like that on her wee-wee? And right then, my mom was coming up to get me. She heard the whole thing. She was totally fine with it. She was totally chill, smiled pleasantly, and removed me from the scene. But the thing was that it was a scientific observation. It was a fact. So she could not really get mad at me for that. What's there to get mad about? Generally, I was an only child, so my parents were really quite interested in my little theories about things and the little things I observed and thought, to chat about and stuff. So there was no need to get mad. They really generally were quite interested in my little ideas. So I was lucky that way. Anyway, one day, Mom had to take me to the babysitter's apartment. And usually this babysitter, who was about 12 or 13, kind of a nondescript girl, would come to our apartment to babysit. But this time, I had to go to her apartment. And I really didn't like this babysitter very much. She was kind of mean. She was mean, and I think a few times she would try to trick me. Like once she taught me the F word. And she made me rehearse it and say it again and again. And she taught it to me real good. And later on, I used that to make inroads into better understanding language, which also was heard by one of my parents who nearly keeled over when I said, "Daddy, do you know what my favorite word is?" All 6'7" of them nearly hit the deck. But again, no problem. So who taught you that? And, it was an honest mistake, so it was okay. Anyway, what I did notice at this babysitter's house was that it was very different. It was a big family. There were lots of kids in this house. The kids really ruled the roost. There didn't seem to be a whole lot of adult supervision in the household. But I think, the mom was there, but you never saw her really. And I was also the youngest. And basically, they were not paying any attention to me. I mean, can you believe that? Nothing. So, okay, that's fine. I'm an only child. I'm used to amusing myself and entertaining myself. That was okay. And then I saw it. It was a little clock sitting in a cut glass candy dish on a table in the living room. Now, this is something for scientific inquiry. I'm looking at it, really checking it out. It has two little brackets on the side, like what you would see, a toilet roll holder kind of thing on the side. And I'm looking at it, I'm starting to develop my theory. And I said, I propose that this is a wristwatch without the straps. But what is it doing in a candy dish? Where are the straps? This was another area to really think about and to inquire. My interest was sparked immediately. I mean, what happened? What happened to this little watch? Why would it be in the I mean, it was very, very unusual. So I started to, ask around. I went to the babysitter. What is this? And would you believe it? She just looked at me, stone-faced, and did not answer my question. Can you believe that? She was just like a blank. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try my luck elsewhere. I went to one of the other kids. Hey, what's this? Again, nothing. No response. I'm thinking, what is going on here? Are these kids like gaslighting me or something? Like, what is happening? So I figured I better try to find an adult. So I go to the kitchen. The mom is there. Previous experiments had shown that using the word please was very important for adults. So I said, please, will you tell me what this is? And she just shooed me out of the kitchen. She was busy. So I was completely flabbergasted. I mean, nobody was interested in my scientific inquiries, or I could not comprehend how this was happening. I was, first puzzled, and then I got really angry. I couldn't believe it. So really, there was only one course of action left for me, which was I took the watch, put it in my pocket. Now, basically I was, for the sake of science, I was willing to go right up to the ethical boundary, like other scientists before me, like Frankenstein or whoever. So I put that watch in my pocket and, got home and immediately brought it out and showed it to my mom. And I said, "Mom, what is this?" And she said, "Well, it looks like a wristwatch with the straps off it." And I'm like, finally, a decent peer review. But then she told me another scientific fact that I had to deal with, which was, we do not take things that do not belong to us. So, much to my horror, I had to go back to the babysitter's house with my mom and return the watch. And I really don't remember how they responded to my, returning it. My sense was that they did not deserve to have that item in their house because they didn't appreciate it. They didn't even know what it was, or they wouldn't tell me what it was. But anyway, I had to give it back to them. So, did it prove my theory? Yes. Did I learn my lesson? Yes. That I apparently am not the center of the universe. Thank you.
How can someone not be the center of the universe? I mean, come on, really, 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 really. Thank you, Allie. Okay, Allie has spent the last 18 years as a mental health therapist and manager at the Prescott VA. She retired last Friday? This Friday. So now she's looking for things to do. So if anybody has something, just glue, Velcro and glue the house down before you invite her over. Let's see. This capped off a wonderful career in public service, helping people with chronic mental illness. As a military spouse, she and her husband Gary have lived in several places, coming to Prescott in 2002. In Ollie's downtime, she plays her flute. She also enjoys hiking, traveling, and learning new things. And she's looking forward to supporting the arts here in Prescott, of which she's doing this. Thank you, Allie. Okay, number 3 on the hit parade, Lisa Doherty.
Well, my story is entitled 32B or Not to Be. And that has been my size since I was first fitted many years ago at a little dressing room. And it still is. Anyway, I'm a proud, lifelong member of the Itty Bitty Titty Committee. But that wasn't always the case. Back when I was in my 30s, I was living in Chicago on the 27th floor of a 40-store high-rise called the Eugenie Terrace Luxury Apartments, complete with a rooftop pool and gymnasium and most of all, a doorman, which is every girl's best friend, every single girl's best friend, I should say. Our doorman was named Ricky, and he was, I think he moonlighted as a bouncer. He was a big, big guy, and a great source of information and so forth. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah. So anyway, Ricky was one of these doormen that when I had a date come to visit, he's assessed them pretty quickly, and he would call upstairs, and if he liked the looks of the guy and he seemed respectful, he would call up and say, "Lisa, Joe Schmo is here, hurry down." And if he didn't like the looks of the guy, he would just tell me to take my time. Take all the time in the world. And I would say, "Ricky, should I be sick?" And he'd say, no, just, he's cool in his heels, take your time. So anyway, when I noticed a really handsome young man in my building who happened to be a resident, I asked Ricky about him. And he told me that the guy was single. His name was Brian. He went to Stanford Law School. He was about 42 and divorced. Sounded good. So the next time I saw Brian, who I happened to see throughout the building, almost serendipitously, I asked him out for coffee. Well, in the course of dating Brian, we went for coffee and then to dinner and then for some other dates. And, I was kind of falling for this guy. I also learned a couple things about him. He hated smoking. I was a smoker at the time. And he loved boobs. In fact, he even suggested that perhaps I consider, an operation. Well, that was out of the question, as were cutlets, like, that you tuck in your bra, ladies, right? So anyway, I kind of had the smoking thing covered. I was taking Zyban, which was a rebranded version of Wellbutrin, which is a very popular antidepressant. So I was taking it to not much success. I was actually a very happy smoker while I was taking it. As for the other problem, I actually was going to a health food store, and I happened to see on a high shelf her, a flamenco dancer, Spanish flamenco dancer in a red dress, and a great big bottle of herbs, and the name Bustin' Out. And this was my solution. I thought, I'll try this, right? And so I bought the bottle, $30, which at the time I was, this a few years ago was a lot of money at the time. So I took it home. The next day was Christmas Eve. And I took my Zyban, as I usually did, and then I took the Bustin' Out. Well, not long after, my legs got shaky. I was feeling really dizzy. I almost felt like I was going to faint. So I took my phone and I went to lay down in bed. And I thought, if I don't feel better in a few minutes, I'm going to call 911. And I did. Well, moments later, there's about 6 firemen around my bed. And I'm thinking, I should have gussied up for this. And then I read the name tags, and it's Callahan, Flanagan, Fitzgibbons, Cassane, Kavanaugh. And I thought, have I died and gone to heaven? So anyway, and I also thought to myself, in this room full of these firemen, where else would you find a group of men in one room that are physically fit, psychologically evaluated, cooking and cleaning is part of their job, and they're brave enough to race into a burning building and rescue you, right? I should have pulled the fire alarm a long time ago. Anyway, they took my, my heart rate and my pulse and did all the usual vitals that EMTs do. And then they asked me that dreaded question, what did you take? So I said, well, I've been taking Zyban for smoking cessation and an herb, a new, like an herbal supplement. Oh, do you have the bottles? Well, so one of them, I said, well, yes, I do. And so one of them went to the kitchen. I said, it's on the cabinet to the right of the refrigerator. And he came back to the bedroom and he held up one bottle of the Zyban and then the other one of the Bustin' Out. And there was kind of no question what it was for. And I know they were ready to bust out laughing, but they stifled it. And one of them said to the other, hey, Joe, you know what? Herbs, this is what the athletes die from, taking the herbs. And the other fireman said, that's not very, very consoling to her, So they determined that they would take me to Northwestern Hospital, which they did, and on Christmas Eve of all days. So I sat there and waited. I think they were waiting for it to wear off. And all day long, Northwestern is an excellent hospital, but it's also a teaching hospital. So a lot of residents streamed in. And I had to tell my story many, many times with the two bottles in front of me, which was humiliating. Anyway, my parents finally came down. They were obviously very busy on Christmas Eve, but they kind of finally came to the hospital. And my mother, as mothers do, hugged me and kissed my forehead and stroked my hair and told me everything would be okay. My father, on the other hand, said, Lisa, you are a college graduate. You are a professional. I can't believe you would fall for this, taking an herb like that. And he said, don't tell anybody about this. So anyway, not the first time I didn't listen to my dad. I did recount the story to the clerk at the health food store when I went to return the bottle of Bustin' Out. And then I told Ricky, my doorman, who was obviously concerned about me, and he felt badly. And he said, Lisa, you've got to just be who you were meant to be, as you are. And any guy that doesn't accept that, is a shame on him. So really the moral is the only big boob in the story was Brian.
You know that there's some practical joke gifts that will be coming your way over the next few months, I think. Just thinking out loud here, that's all. Anyway, thank you, Lisa. Lisa is a first-time storyteller here on the STM, at STM. Yay! She says she is descended from a long line of Irish raconteurs. Now, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but well, I know that, but Irish storytellers, so I don't know whether that means they're truth tellers or just, yeah, okay. Anyways, she is a public relations executive, and she actually helps clients craft their stories, and was very excited to tell hers tonight. Lisa also performs here in town with both the Prescott Improv Collective and the Prescott Mystery Company that performs here. If you've never been to one of their murder mysteries, Liz, when's the next murder mystery? July 19th, next murder mystery. And For Better, For Worse, For Murder? Yes, the title of that one. So tickets on sale at the Elks website. Anyways, back to Lisa. And she also co-hosts a LOL Club improv workshop on Saturdays. Okay, busy girl. Thank you. Okay, our last story before the break, M.
So the title of this story is Fledgling. 1986, August. My mom, my dad, my sister, and our Mexican exchange student pile into my dad's tomato red Buick Skylark. They're taking me to Tulane University. I don't know how all of us and my stuff for the dorm fit in the car. We spent 2 or 3 days driving, and all I can remember from that trip is Texas, and more Texas. Texas goes on forever. We got to New Orleans, and I don't know what happened to Mom and Dad and the rest of the family. They kind of disappeared into the abyss of my past. I made it in time for freshman orientation and got my room set up. I had red and teal comforter. I don't know what made me choose those colors. But as any good bird teaching someone to fly, there were 2 things that happened. One is most birds just kick their birds out of the nest and they learn to fly from the ground right below the family nest. We had to drive 1,300 miles in over 20 hours. Get to school, and like a good bird, Mom and Dad got me a meal plan. Birds take care of their birds, make sure they have food for a while. So I got the meal plan, but college dorm food, kind of questionable, and I was a picky eater. So luckily, Mom was looking out for me. I got a toaster oven, and I got a teapot, an electric teapot, so I could make some quesadillas and some macaroni and cheese. I wasn't going to starve. I was off at school for the first time, away from my family. Tulane had about 10,000 or more students, and there was only one person there besides me that I knew. It was the first crush I ever had in my life in kindergarten. He was there, But the truth is, I only saw him once in the entire school year. So really, I was at school all alone. Nobody knew me. Nobody knew my family. I could be anyone I wanted to be. Back at home, I hadn't really fit in, though I was kind of like a chameleon. I could fit in with anybody, though I didn't feel like I fit in. I was different with this group and that group and this group and that group, but I wanted to be all of me. I didn't really know how to do that, so I stayed up all night playing cards with my peers. We played pinochle and talked philosophy in an 18-year-old sort of way. We were asking the meaning of the world and how I fit in and how you fit in and what our place in the world would be. We were excited to be exploring all of these kids who'd never been away from home for the first time, and the few that had been at boarding school. They had a little wisdom for us. There were explorations of all kinds. Being in New Orleans was very different from being where I'd grown up. I grew up in Denver. Denver was a mile-high city, much like Prescott, and the climate was very different from New Orleans. That 5 feet below sea level, surrounded by lakes and the Gulf, which has now been renamed. That's a whole other story. And the muddy Mississippi. I'd never seen a river that big in my life, and it was filthy. The only thing I saw for rivers in Colorado were these cute little creeks that were crystal clear, and you could drink out of them if the water was running fast enough. I wouldn't want to put anything to drink near the Mississippi or take anything to drink from the Mississippi. The other thing about New Orleans was, and in contrast to Denver, was the forests. In the Rockies, we have evergreen forests and aspen forests, and the aspen forests always bring a smile to my face. The leaves kind of twinkle and it's bright and light. Well, the forests in New Orleans are called swamps. The trees are close together and they have moss hanging off of them and all around the bark. And it's in water. They're in water, standing water. What's in the water? I don't know. It's not a forest that's very inviting to me, especially with the stories of New Orleans. It's kind of dark and mysterious. What's hiding in those swamps? We'll never know, and I'm certainly not going to go find out. I was on a mission to make choices for the first time in my life. I remember riding the streetcar, the famous St. Charles streetcar, down to the Quarter. The locals called it the Quarter. Everyone else calls it the French Quarter. But we'd take the streetcar to the Quarter, and along the way, we'd see the Garden District of New Orleans. It's where the big, beautiful mansions are with big trees and lush gardens. We'd get down to the Quarter, and sometimes we'd go to Café du Monde and have some café au lait and beignets and watch the pigeons all around. Sometimes we'd go to the Quarter and get a hurricane, walk on the streets. Bourbon Street was a thing with all the bars. It's kind of fascinating for an 18-year-old, but honestly, not really my thing. Again, I was more interested in figuring out who I was and how I fit in the world. Back home in Denver, my parents had kept a really tight leash on my sister and I. They had rules. Everything was supposed to be their way, their rules and their punishments. I could never understand. They always seemed sort of erroneous. I remember many nights sitting at the dinner table long after everyone else had finished because I was told I had to clean my plate. There were people starving in other parts of the world. Eventually, they'd let me go to bed with a promise that I'd get my leftovers for breakfast. Luckily, that never happened. They also had a rule in the summertime that we had to be in bed by 7:30. Most of you were running around your neighborhoods till the lights came on. Not me. I had to be in bed. Why? I never understood. I remember sitting there when I was supposed to be in bed asleep, looking out the window at all the kids running around the neighborhood. I was mad. I was frustrated. I was angry. How come I had to be in bed? The lights hadn't even come on yet. Anyway, back to college. I'd chosen Tulane because, well, my parents wanted a good life for me. They wanted me to finish college, go to college, finish college, and have a good career, because neither one of them had done that. So I decided after lots of exploration that I wanted to be an architect. It was a career that I could get behind. And then the decision was which school? Well, I ended up choosing Tulane because it had a very practical program, and besides, it was in a fun place. So, happy to be at Tulane, not so happy about classes. And it wasn't even that I wasn't happy about classes. It was that back at home, I'd never learned natural consequences. So now I was able to make choices for the first time in my life. So instead of choosing to go to classes on the regular and in any normal way that my mom would have said I had to do, I went to classes where I enjoyed the teacher, the professor, or I enjoyed the class, and the rest, well, I didn't make it to. So I ended that school year. Oh, wait, I got to come back to Mardi Gras. I was in New Orleans. I can't forget about Mardi Gras. And that ties into Lisa's story. As you can imagine, I had a couple friends from Denver come to New Orleans for Mardi Gras. And one of them was a 6'4" guy, and I got to sit up on his shoulders and look over the crowd for the parades. That was fun. But the thing that was most significant about Mardi Gras that year was what I heard. You in the red, show your tits! You in the red, show your tits! And I'm looking down going, oh, I'm the one in red. I had a red cashmere sweater on. I got to make a decision. Was I gonna... It was daylight, and I hadn't had a drink. Wasn't happening. Anyway, I ended that school year with a dismal 1.82 GPA. Not because I couldn't have gotten a really great GPA, but because I was making choices for the first time in my life. And now I got to deal with the natural consequence for the first time in my life. I didn't get to go back. I'd lost my financial aid. But I learned what a natural consequence was, which I spent many years figuring out. And I figured out that my life is about finding my place and my wholeness in the world and sharing that with everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Em. Appreciate that. Em spent the majority of her life, I know this will shock everybody, of living her life on the fringe of society. And is excited to be jumping into the arena of life here in Prescott, beginning with getting on stage and telling a story for the first time. In her previous life, Em was a stay-at-home mom, a homeschool mother of 4, and raised her kids in an Airstream RV trailer before either homeschooling or tiny homes were a thing. I can't even imagine that. I just picture the trailer, it's like, wow. Em is an intuitive advisor, coach, writer, and facilitator. In this phase of her life, she's planning to get published and be on speaking stages. So, thank you, Em. It is wild card time. So, first wild card, Matt Santos.
So the theme today was through a new lens, right? So I'm going to tell you an actual story about a new lens. Many years ago, my wife and I, about 25 years ago, we were planning a trip out of country. It's a big trip. And I wanted to buy a new lens. So I did. I ordered one. It was pretty expensive, about $1,500, and it was getting delivered to the house. And at the time, I was living in an area that wasn't what you would call the safest neighborhood in the area. It was a suburb, small suburb, about 150,000 people outside of Oakland, California. And that lens needed to be delivered. I forgot to start my timer. That lens needed to be delivered and signed for by the delivery company. And I came home from work one day. There was this box sitting on the sidewalk outside of my driveway. And I pick it up, and it's from the camera store in New York. No signature, and nobody stole it. I was amazed. So I go inside. The next morning, I call the delivery company that drives a big brown truck. And I said, hey, I'm just curious. Here's my tracking number. Who signed for my package? And they put me on hold. Came back a couple minutes later and said, well, our driver left it, but he left it in a safe place, but nobody signed for it. So we've started the claim for you. I said, okay. And they said, we want you to contact the seller in New York and let them know that we've started a claim. So I said, okay. Then I went on my trip with my brand new $1,500 lens. And I came back from my trip, and I got a phone call from UPS, and they says, you know, we've investigated your claim, and the driver said he left it there, and we've actually interviewed some of your neighbors, and nobody saw anybody taking it. So we need to know why you started this claim. I said, I never started a claim. I made a phone call asking who signed for my lens. Then I get a call from the seller in New York, and they said, well, they filed this claim. We can't find it, so we've refunded your money, and we'll get our take from the shipper. I said, okay. And I enjoyed my $1,500 lens. And then a couple weeks go by after that, and I get a call from their fraud department, and they said, you realize we can press charges for filing a faulty claim on your new lens. And I says, can you send me the transcript of the call where I filed the claim? He goes, we're going to do that. And he hung up the phone, called me back a couple weeks later. Everything is 2 weeks with that company. They called me back and they says, well, we can't really find where you filed a claim, but we're going to continue our investigation. And if we find out anything was done on your part to falsify a claim, we'll be in touch. Well, that was 25 years ago. They haven't called me back on that yet. I guess the reason I'm telling you this story is because I try and be an honest person. So you could either feel much better about yourselves because you're way more honest than me, or I've just explained to you how to get stuff for free from UPS.
Okay, now I don't suggest actually that anybody follow those rules. Just, this is just his experience. Okay, one more. Lexie.
Okay, so I was working at a bison ranch outside of Wyoming, and after a very, very long day of work, my coworker and I wanted to jump into the water because it was very hot that day. So we go to the reservoir. It's about 25 foot cliff, and we needed to clear a pretty wide bank in order to make it into the deeper side of the water. So he was like, as long as you get a good enough running start, you can make it. I was like, okay, I think I got this. And I knew better. I mean, I can run pretty well, but I can't jump very far. And so I calculated it out. I thought I could do it. And I didn't. So I hit the bank about 2 feet of water, which is basically cement at that point. And like Chris, you understand feet pain. And so I shattered both of my heels. And it's one of the most painful bones in your body to break, apparently. And I broke both of them. Go big or go home, right? So, was rushed to the hospital. It took maybe about an hour to get there because we were far outside of town. And it was pretty terrible. And several surgeries of trying to repair things. And the hospital experience was pretty traumatizing. I was in and out of consciousness from the pain. It was awful. But anyways, so it was about a year of several surgeries. This one only had one surgery, was one and done, good to go. This one was my problem child. It also had an open wound on it, so I guess dirty water had gotten into it. And they should have taken care of that, like cleaned it out efficiently, but my surgeon did not. So wound up getting infection in the bone. And so a year later, after all these surgeries, he wound up removing the hardware, thinking that that was maybe the problem and what was causing the infections. And that was not the case, because was caused by dirty water. So he was giving me all the wrong antibiotics, and then I got resistant to some that would actually kill the infection. So it was pretty terrible. But he, then my foot wound up collapsing again, like shattered again, non-union fracture, I guess is what it's called. So at that point, after a year, I was like, well, let me go get some second opinions. And so I met with 6 different surgeons around the country, because that one was obviously not the one that I should go with. And so all of them, without me telling them what the last guy said, recommended amputation if I want a good quality of life. And I was like, you know what? Like, I was 29 at the time, and I was like, I really want, I have life to live still. I am very active. I train horses. I'm a ranch hand. I dance. That's my therapy. And I need to be able to do things. And so if this is what I need to do it, then fine. So I wound up going with an amputation, and it was just below the knee. So I got to keep my knee, which is great. And so now it's been since September. That was the amputation. And I'm getting my life back, and it's pretty cool. And I'm able to dance again. I'm starting to train horses again. I can't do physical labor quite yet, but I'm working towards that, working towards getting all my strength back and figuring out legs again and how to function. So this one's still full of metal. This one now is metal. But it's working out pretty well. Pain here and there, but otherwise, yeah, just get my life back, so.
Our next real storyteller, not that they're fake storytellers, Mark Peugh.
All righty, 1976. Nation's bicentennial, and everybody was pretty absorbed in that except for me. This was my first summer out of high school, and I was bored. So I called my best friend Dan, and I said, how are we going to fill the weekend? And we decided hiking would be a good idea. We made our way from Prescott up to Sedona. We were going to hike down to the Verde Valley. We figured that'd kill the weekend. Took us a day. We got down there late afternoon, and were greeted at Clarkdale by a horrendous monsoon. I mean, a real frog choker, and we were soaked all the way through. We had absolutely no opportunity for shelter. Not sure what we were going to do. Dan said that he had an aunt that lived nearby, so we dropped a dime. When was the last time you guys got to say that? Auntie came by, she grabbed us, took us back, fed us, dried out all our stuff. It was all good. The next morning we woke up and she said that she needed a trip to Los Angeles and she hated to drive alone. Would we mind going with her? So we threw our backpacks in, away we went. We got to LA and Dan says, I have a sister in San Francisco. Grabbed our backpacks, we jumped out on the freeway, and the first little introduction we got to California was the California Highway Patrol. And they detained us for some hours on the side of the freeway. They looked through every pouch, every pocket, every crevice that you could look through, except the one that had our party favors in. And when he finally got frustrated, he let us go. And very quickly we got a ride with what I would have to call the proverbial California hippie bus. I had no idea what that was until then. But I can tell you, as an 18-year-old boy, everything of interest to me was in that bus. It was a nice trip. We we got out, and I stood there thinking to myself, my perspective is changing a little bit here. We were happy and we were high. Turns out that Dan's sisters both were a couple years older than us. They didn't have a lot of time for a couple of teenage boys in San Francisco. So I had a great idea, and I said, I have a sister in Louisville, Kentucky. So we grabbed our backpacks and off we went. We make our way back to Prescott. Again, another run-in with Chips out in the desert. The street people in Barstow were quite an adventure. But we get back to Prescott and we took inventory. We had started that trip with 24 cents. We now had 26 cents. I have no idea how that happened, but we restocked. We took off. Anybody that finds himself hitchhiking, don't go through Flagstaff. I will tell you that we stayed there for a long time. Flagstaff is not a fun place to hitchhike out of, but we did make it out of there. I had a brother that was in the Army in Colorado. There's an Army base up there. Anybody remember? Fort Carson, I think it is. And he snuck us into the barracks. We spent the night there. The next day, he takes us up, drops us off at I-70, and very shortly we get a ride from a stocky, bald, well-inked gentleman who gave us a ride literally all the way across the state of Kansas. Nice enough guy. It was a little odd. He was stopping every 100 miles. We didn't quite figure that out. But we get to Kansas City. It's late, middle of the night, and he says, look, I got a 2-hour stop I'm going to make. I'm coming back through. If you guys are still here, I can get you all the way to St. Louis. So we did, he did, and we were on our way. And we finally got the nerve to ask him, why every 100 miles? Turns out he had just been released from prison. He had to check in with his probation officer every 100 miles. So clearly he didn't kill us or worse. So we get to St. Louis. I didn't have any idea how dangerous St. Louis was, but it was. The guy that picked us up had an ice chest full of Coors beer. Now, in 1976, Coors west of the Mississippi was a real treat, and he gave us carte blanche. So he kept pointing out spots in St. Louis that were dangerous. Just last weekend, people got shot at that overpass, la-da-da-da-da. He made it his mission to get us all the way through St. Louis into a safe location within striking distance of my sister's house. And we called her, and she came out and grabbed us. And, of course, we were hungry, and we were drunk. So that's how we got started there. And after a couple of weeks, it dawned on my sister that we were probably hungrier than she wanted to deal with. And she told us that we needed to get a job. Well, we looked, and there wasn't a lot of jobs. We didn't have any experience, anything of that nature. But there was one job in the paper that said, "Will train." Fred Astaire Dance Studio. And I'm thinking to myself, I had rhythm, okay? How tough can this be? I can dance, right? I was thinking cheek to cheek. They were thinking 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, cha-cha-cha. I had no idea what that was all about, but I was a quick learner. They gave me some intense training for a couple of weeks, and they decided, we don't need you in Louisville, Kentucky. We need you in Toledo, Ohio. And I said, well, okay. I said, I've got a traveling mate. We'll discuss it. They said, if he's up for it, we'll train him. We'll fly you both up. So we did. Okay, we both arrived in Toledo, Ohio, very hungover. And I will tell you that there were two things that became quite obvious to me about the dance business, at least this particular studio. I might qualify that. It ran on two things: sales and sex. And it did. And sales were high pressure and script oriented. You were memorizing these scripts and you were running these scripts on these, innocent clients and that sort of thing. And as far as the sex is concerned, that might be another talk that I'll give, or if anybody really needs to know the November issue, 1978 of Forum, you can read all about it there. But my first student was Barbara Vanderhorst. And like I say, I was hungover. I had 2 weeks worth of instruction, and I get thrown out on the floor with her. And she is just the nicest, meekest, kindest woman. She was the widow of a farmer. I have no idea how long she'd been a widow. But she had more knowledge about dancing than I did. She's been doing this for a while, and she could recognize these scripts with the first paragraph. And she'd stop, hold her finger up, and she'd just say, "Can we just dance? And then you just tell me how many hours you want me to buy." Now dance lessons were $65 an hour in 1976, and they paid me $4.50. So there's a little bit of a markup as far as that's concerned. So the months go on. I'm learning how to dance a little better, and I'm paying attention to the clientele and such. And there was one particular client. She wasn't my student, but her name was Mrs. Shibish. We all called her Peugh, because when you saw it spelled out with the P's and the Y's and the S's and the Z's, and that's what it looked like. But Mrs. Shibish was about my height. She had raven black hair. She was built just like Dolly Parton. And I can tell you that if she would have asked, there was very little that I wouldn't have done for her. I think she sensed that because she approached me and she said, "You know, Mark," she says, "I've got a daughter and I'd like for you to teach her how to dance." Okay, pick me. I'm your guy. And a couple of days later, Peugh shows up with her daughter, and let me paint this picture for you, okay? Corrine is early teens, painfully shy, thin as a toothpick, straight dishwater, blonde hair, stares only at the floor, okay? But when she did occasionally glance up, she had these super thick glasses, okay? And when you caught her eyes just right, those lenses magnified those green eyes, and she looked alien. I mean, it was weird. It just was, So I've taken the job, right? So I get her out on the dance floor, and she has no rhythm. She has no timing. She has no nothing. And I'm thinking it's probably because she's really, self-conscious. All right, there's other people trying to learn how to dance out there on the floor and the like. So I decided to take her back in the private room for instruction. And I go ahead and turn on the music, and I said, "Corrine, this whole dancing thing is only moving while music is playing, okay?" And I said, "And as far as looking silly or being self-conscious, okay, that's all in your head." And to prove it, the music's going, and I start just hopping around the room, and I'm doing stupid things. I'm flailing my arms, I'm bobbing my head, I'm messing my hair up, I'm doing anything that I can do that would make me look silly. And I said, by definition, I'm dancing, okay? And before long, I get her hopping around a little bit, okay? And she's getting relaxed, okay? And ultimately, I walk over and I grab her two hands, all right? And we start hopping together, all right? And then it dawns on her that we're actually doing this in time with the music. And the lights come on a little bit, okay? She smiles, and now I'm starting to move into some dance moves. Now we can do a little rock step and maybe cha-cha, back and forth, little 1, 2, 3 waltz. She's catching on pretty good. A couple of weeks of that go by, and we find out that there's a dance competition happening in Cleveland, Ohio. And it would be our studio against the dreaded Arthur Murray. Quite a little bit of competition between the two studios, I was to find out. And Mrs. Shibish approaches me and she says, "I'd like you to take my daughter to the dance competition." So I get busy teaching her a routine. Miss Shibish gets busy making these costumes, and these are gaudy costumes. I mean, the costumes is the only way to describe it. They're black velvet. I got a red silk shirt on with just big, poofy white lace. You don't even want to visualize what I look like. It was embarrassing. But we go up as a team, and we've all got our little corner, and one by one they call our numbers, and one by one we compete. And I'm nervous. This is Corrine. Okay, this is the toothpick. I don't know what to expect. Don't have any idea, but it's our turn. They call our number, we come out, the spotlight it comes on, and we start our routine. And at the beginning, Corrine is predictably stiff. Okay? We get, about halfway into it, and she's loosening up. And then we get to the end of this routine, and she is a regular Ginger Rogers. Something happened to her. She just came alive all of a sudden. And we get to the end of the routine, and I spin her out for her presentation curtsy, all right? And when she does, the whole crowd just erupts. And I look at this girl, okay? And she's having her curtsy, and she's lost every curl in her hair, okay? There's little beads of perspiration on her face. And she turns around and she looks at me, and those big green eyes just flash at me, and they're just sparkling. And there is this smile that's just plastered across her face. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, along with her first place, Kareen's got a new perspective. And so did I. Thank you.
That's a fun story. The first time I heard that when they were in auditions, and the very first thing I thought of afterwards was a song by Jackson Browne. What was it? The Dancer. And there's a line in the song from that goes something like this: between the time you arrive and the time you leave, you go, is the reason you're alive, but you'll never know. And that's what that story reminded me of. You just never know the people that you run into, the impact you're going to have on their life. So it's just amazing. Anyways, Mark enjoys quiet nights with his honey. Other leisurely activities, this is leisurely stuff, reading, writing, and traveling. When he's in the great outdoors, he spends time RVing, camping, rafting, and riding his ATV. Mark is a survivor of cancer and also a survivor of being raised in a cult. And those are other stories. He's had 2 wives, but his greatest challenge of all, and hardest of all, is just being Mark. So. Okay, so we have one more story. Tim Magill, come on down.
So the doc said, this horse is going blind. And that was a gut punch to both me and my wife, because we were looking at this horse for my 8-year-old daughter. But she had already kind of invaded our hearts, and so we were thinking about it. She was a leopard Appaloosa. Her name was Sue, and she was only about 14 hands high. So if you haven't been around horses much, that means that she's about my height. She had a snowy white coat that was dappled very delicately with little red spots. That's a leopard Appaloosa. She came to us a little bit by accident. She was from a family that just really couldn't afford her anymore, so she came to us a little bit underweight and ill cared for, but she just had an amazing disposition and offered trust and just asked for trust in return. The doc, when we took her over to get her vet check before we were going to buy her, was poking and prodding her and pulling on her limbs to test to see if she had arthritis. She was about 22, and that's a little older for a horse, particularly if you're thinking about that for an 8-year-old kid. The doc stepped away with kind of a wry smile, and he looked at me and said, I got to tell you, this horse has got the sweetest disposition. This horse has got great feet. She's got no arthritis. She's got great wind. In other words, she had good lungs. But she's going to go blind. Might not happen 6 weeks. Might not happen 6 months. Might be 6 years. But it's going to happen, Tim, so you got to know. She's going to go blind, and she's 22 years old. We bought her anyway. My daughter, I tell you, that horse, she was short and delicate looking, but she could pack a load all day long, and sure enough, she packed my daughter through countless miles in the round pen and through countless hours and all kinds of different lessons. And the two of them built that kind of bond that only an 8-year-old girl can build with a horse. But sure enough, at some point, Darkness started to close in on her, and sure enough, she went blind. My daughter moved on to other horses because she had a rodeo career in front of her, and we had to idle Sue, that leopard Appaloosa, into a stall. Pretty good sized stall, had a nice turnout, so she could move around quite a bit. She took to her blindness with a grace that no human would have. And one of the things that was amazing about her is she would, when we put her into that pen, she would go around and touch the metal rails all the way around on the fence so she'd know where she was. And once she got that spatial awareness, I'm here to tell you, she could book it from one side to the other and pull up right before she hit that fence. So she had an amazing spatial awareness and did fine. Never bashed into the fence, never bashed into her water trough, never bashed into her feed bucket, nothing. But still, we were wondering, what are we going to do with her? My friends would tell her, Tim, I know you love that horse, but you got to put her down. It's not fair to keep a blind horse in a stall all the time, and you sure as hell can't ride her. Got on her anyway. Before I got on her, we started building a relationship, and in the evenings, before I went to bed, I'd come up to check on her, and I'd open the gate, and she'd hear that creak and kind of pat her way over to me because she'd know I'd be there. And just like the fence, she'd come up and just bump me gently with her nose. I'd stand there for long enough, and she'd bump me up and down my body, all the way from, shouldn't do this with a horse, but she'd bump me on my face, go down my chest, all the way down to my toes. Every once in a while, she'd breathe in a big breath as she smelled my essence, kind of let it out with a... But I just loved that time. I'd stand there and just let my soul be read by Braille. That horse knew more about me in those moments than any of my friends did over a lifetime. So you better believe it. She offered trust and just asked for trust in return, so I got on her, much to the chagrin of my friends who were better riders. Our first kind of couple of trips out, we were reluctant, and we had to kind of learn each other a little bit. I'd be watching the ground really carefully. I had to be her lens to see the world, and I knew that. But pretty quick, we got to understand each other, and she adopted kind of a high-stepping gait to step over rocks that she knew were out there but just couldn't see. We'd go up an embankment, and as we were to do so, I'd stop her and I'd say, up. And she was so smart that when she heard me say up, and if I said up, 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 she knew to pick up those front legs, and we were going to go up an embankment. And if we're going to go down, I'd say down. And she'd lift put all that weight back on our haunches, and then feel out in front of her with those front feet. So we would go up and down steep embankments that other riders wouldn't do with a sighted horse. One of our favorite rides, we'd go up about 20, 30 miles east of here. Ash Creek goes up north towards Big Mesa, and just a beautiful ride underneath the cottonwoods and the sycamores, and she could feel that coolness. That was one of her favorite rides, certainly mine. Before you get to Big Mesa, you take a left going northwest up of Ash Creek, and it's Osborne Wash. And Osborne's Wash is wonderful because it's got this sandy stretch. It's just like a beach. Doesn't have any rocks, no nothing. And so we'd been over that territory, hundreds of times, and she could feel that sand underneath her feet, and she knew that we'd have about a half mile to a mile stretch. There'd be no rocks. There were no potholes. This is nice and smooth, Tim. So she'd be hopping all over the place. She'd be bunny hopping, and she'd be rearing up on me. I'd have to reach down, pull up, whoa, kind of pet her easy on her neck, say, "No, we got to stay at a walk, girl." Well, she was having none of it, and I swear to you, I think we had a conversation. Most of her side of it was something like this. I have given you trust, and you haven't returned that. Haven't you learned a damn thing about our time together? And likewise, what the hell good is it to pack a perfectly sighted human on your back if you can't run? Well, we had this argument a few times, and one day she won. We were bouncing all over the place, and I'm like, okay, I give up. I reached down, put the reins in front of me, and I reached down and whispered in her ear, okay, girl, let's fly. Started off as a nice, easy trot, kind of just a little bit of a jog, but turned into a lope pretty quick, and all of a sudden we were on a dead run. I was terrified. I was looking down at the ground, looking for that thing that was going to plunge us to the death that my friends all predicted was going to happen. But pretty quick, that fear turned to joy. Because I'm here to tell you, this was running like nothing I'd ever experienced before. This was not running out of fear or running out of obligation like I'd felt with other horses. This was running for running's sake. It wasn't running, it was flying. Pretty quick, the sand kind of gave way to gravel, and she could feel that under her feet. So she put her weight back in her haunches, and I did the same thing. I put my butt back into the saddle a little bit. Pretty quick, we're just to a trot and then an easy walk. It was a glider coming in for a perfect landing. So we went out and we had these private flights frequently, but I never told my friends about them. They didn't understand. They never would, never will. I guess they're going to learn now. So Sue's been gone for about 20 years now, and I think about her every day, and I miss her dearly. I hope I gave her a good life. When this life is done with me, I pray she's there. And I pray she'll have her sight back. And if she does, I'll jump on her back and I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to reach down and I'm going to whisper in her ear, okay, girl, let's fly. Thank you.
Tim grew up here in Arizona and spent his time exploring, riding, hiking, and camping all over the state. Much of his adult career was in the outdoor education field, leading nonprofits that offered trauma recovery, outdoor adventure camps for impoverished and abused kids, foster families, women survivors of human trafficking, as well as veterans recovering from PTSD. So, but wait, there's more. Tim holds certificates in equine-assisted therapy, horsemanship instruction, overnight horseback wilderness guiding, open water lifeguarding, swift water rescue, as well as high ropes course and zip line management. But wait, there's more. Tim currently is the financial business manager for the Charlotte Hall Museum. He lives in PV, where he spends as much time as possible with his 8 favorite beings on the planet. His wife of 40 years, his daughter, 4 horses, 2 dogs, not necessarily in that order. Those are his words, not mine. So I'm just bringing that out. So there you go. Tim Magill. So what'd you think? I thought it was pretty good myself. So we hope you enjoyed the program.